In this clip, we're going to go ahead and duplicate our grass. So here we are back, and now that we have our grass blade made, we're going to go ahead and start duplicating it and just making little patches of grass here. So let's go ahead and start with this tall one over here. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this, and I'm just going to go ahead and hide all these modifiers. Click yes, and let's go ahead into path, line, vertex. And let's go ahead and just slightly change the shape of this one. Put the root right around the same place where the other one is. And because it's tall, I don't want too many grass pieces here. I just want maybe 1 or 2 or 3. That should do it. Let's go ahead and see if our editable polys still work. And it worked out pretty well. Perfect. Let's go ahead and make another one. And again, going to go to loft, path, line. And it's just going to go ahead and make this one very small. Something like this. That looks pretty good. Slightly buggy here in the middle, so I'm just going to go and crank this down a little bit. Looks pretty good. Now, another thing I want to do is I'm going to go to loft, deformation, scale. I'm just going to go ahead and shrink this one a little bit down, make it slightly thinner, and just so I can have a little bit more variation in my grass here. And also I'm going to go ahead and change the twist on this one and move it a little down. And I'm going to move the grass blade a little forward here. In fact, I'm going to actually put it behind. Same with this one. And move that right around here. And I'm also going to change the twist on this one as well, because I don't want to repeat. So I'm going to go into loft here, deformation twist. And perhaps this one should be slightly a bit more twisted. Looks pretty good. Now looking at it, it's a little bit too out there, so I'll probably need another little piece of grass over here on this side as well, just to ground it with the land a little bit. So I'm just going to make this super small. And again, you will get those warnings, and they're just warning you that you have a destructible stack on top of your layers, and it might not work after this. But you just ignore this, and if something goes wrong, you can always just re-add that editable poly and just get those edges away again. So let's just move that right about here. And I want this quite small. Move that over here, make this slightly smaller as well. I just want basically to ground it to the ground, because if you have tall grass like this, it will really stand out. So you do want to make sure that it has a little bit of feathering going on in front. And you can always add a few more layers in front, but I find it easier to have, more flatter grass blades, because that way you can just remove those and it won't look too dense. I'm just going to move that over here. Let's go ahead into our loft now. And I'm just going to make sure that it's a little thinner at the base here. And move this a little bit down and this a little bit up. Perhaps too much. Perfect. And just going to move that behind this grass over here. And that looks pretty good. I'm actually going to go ahead and select all of these, go into my materials, and I'm just going to add nice glossy material to this whole thing. Perhaps make it a little darker as well. And what that will help you to do is just to see what the specular would look like. And again, this is just the modeling part of the grass, but you should really stay tuned, because we will most likely be doing the texturing part of this tutorial, where I'll cover how to bake this grass and how to put it into the engine. If you're doing this tutorial, you should already be familiar with baking. What you would do is you would use this plane here as your low polygon, and then you would use these grass blades as your high polygon mesh in XNormal or Painter, and then you would be able to bake these into textures. So now that I have this one, I will actually duplicate this over here and start making my second set here. So perhaps move those around here, duplicate that, and basically I'm just trying to make sure that every grass blade is slightly different. Depending on the situation, I would create maybe a couple of those sets. Some sets with grass, some sets with flowers. It really depends on the game, and depending on the quality of the grass as well. Sometimes you would pack maybe 8, 10 grass sheets onto one texture. Sometimes you'll have 2 or 3. Last time when I worked on Fable, we had quite a tall grass, and we were allowed to use 2 or 3 grass blades per sheet, just so we can have a little bit more detail in there. So I'm just basically copying this around. And again, it's a lot of repetition and this process is quite tedious. One thing I used to do is I used to try and sculpt the grass a little bit in ZBrush as well. But as I learned, through experience, is that adding too much detail to the grass, especially sculpted detail, could really make the grass too thick, too unnatural looking, and it would really stand out. And I noticed that you want the grass to, you want it to look pretty and soft. You don't want it necessarily to stand out too much because it could, throw away from the game. I'm just going to change the twist on this one. And again, I'm just repeating the same thing over and over again. I'm going to grab this over here, put it a little bit in front over here, and maybe make one bigger one behind here. I'm actually noticing that it's maybe a little too narrow, so I'm going to move here and here. And again, I sort of come up with these as I go. But if you're struggling to come up with some grass blades, you can always create a little doodle in Photoshop and just use that as your guideline. And I've done that before. And I notice most of the time whenever I work, it's always best to work with a little bit of a concept. But just because I've done the grass so many times now, I'm just used to making it from the top of my head. This is perfect. And I'm going to make this slightly smaller here. Of course, I always want to make sure that I come back to each one of those blades afterwards as well and try to play around with the scale and with the twist a little bit just to make sure that each grass blade is slightly different. And as you can see, I have a little glitch here, and that's basically because we've been using the stacked up editable poly. So I'm going to try and figure out which one it is, and it's this one. So I'm going to delete this one over here, and I'm going to delete this one as well. And I'm just going to select shell here, click editable poly. Let's hide turbo smooth for a bit. Go in there and just do the same thing again. And that would happen. So basically what happened is because my shape changed so much underneath, 3ds Max couldn't recognize the changes anymore. So what happened is it was just freaking out and creating random shapes here. So what you have to do is you just delete the editable poly modifier and you just come back and you redo the same thing again, and then it should work. So here we go. This worked pretty well. I'm going to select this piece here and just going to rotate it. And that's another thing you can do. You don't necessarily have to create a new shape every time. You can just reuse the same one. So I'm just going to scale this down a little bit. And move that over here. That looks pretty good. And as you notice, there's quite a bit of space left on this sheet. So I might as well move this a little bit to the side. Perhaps have some space for another tall one. And then in here, I'll model the wide grass blades. You pretty much get the idea. So what I would do is I would finish up this sheet, bake it down into a texture, and that would be the grass blades. So this is it for this clip. In the next clip, let's go ahead and start modeling some leaves for our tree.